Right, good evening all. Welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Patrick Walsh and I am the chair of this committee. So a few housekeeping points before we begin. Sorry, I think we're having a little bit of a tech issue. Okay, so a few housekeeping points. This meeting is being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. By participating, you are consenting to be recorded. If the fire alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting. Please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the nearest exit, which is in the lift lobby down the stairs. Officers will direct you to the assembly point on Shortlands Road. Please be reminded that when speaking, please ensure that you speak close to the microphone and directly into it. It won't pick up your voice if you are too far away. Okay, so moving on to item 1, which is apologies for absence. No apologies for absence have been received. And then moving along to item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? Okay, none received. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Do members agree the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 12th of September 23 are a true and accurate record? Okay, perfect. Then swiftly moving along to item 4, annual audit report, value for money 21, 22 and 22 and 23. Could I ask Sukhvinder to introduce this item, please? So I should also mention audit is James Newman.
Thank you, Chair. Really, the report is Paul's report, our external auditor's report into the council's finances overall. So really, I need to pass across to Paul to present the report to you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Dossett. I'm the audit partner for the council, and I'm joined by my colleague Alexa Nagini. I will just give you a little bit of an overview before Alexa takes you through the key points of the report. We've probably said this before, but just as a reminder, as the external auditor of the local authority, we have 2 specific responsibilities. One is to give you an opinion on the financial statements, and I'll come to that at the next item. And the second is to give you an overview of arrangements for value for money. And effectively, that requires the auditors to comment on 3 areas: financial sustainability, governance, and arrangements for achieving economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. This report is a joint report. For reasons we all know, the audit regime has got a bit behind, and we're trying to catch up things. So this covers both 21-22 and 22-23. This means that you're fully up to date in terms of your value for money assessment by us, by us delivering this report to you. This report is actually quite a complicated one because there are differentiated sort of comments between where you are on aspects of your general fund and aspects of your housing revenue account, and they're the different comments and different assessments. I'll stop there. I'll hand over to Alexa, who will just take us through the highlights, and then, of course, over to questions from members.
Thank you. So we sort of assessed value for money against 3 branches: financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. In terms of financial sustainability, the council we concluded has generally appropriate arrangements in place for 21-22 and 22-23. This is obviously characterised by the underspends on the general fund for both those years. The medium-term position, although challenging, is definitely in a better position than some of the other councils that we're currently dealing with. This is obviously demonstrated by the healthy level of reserves and the generally strong budget management that we can see at the authority during the years in question. The current savings plan is also, we conclude, generally achievable, though obviously requires greater development to meet the medium-term gap, though we rest assurance on the authority's previously strong budget management to identify these savings in the lead up to the materialisation of the medium term. That assessment excludes our conclusion on the housing revenue account, which I'll come to shortly. In terms of governance, the council, we also concluded it has appropriate governance arrangements in place. We made a few light touch improvement recommendations, which are the lowest form of recommendation that we can issue, to do with some arrangements with risk and audit committee arrangements, and economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So this is kind of relating to service performance, procurement, partnership arrangements, and the council is performing generally well service-wise, and can point to a number of successes in both the years in question. That excludes the service performance of housing, which we have noted to be a significant weakness. Now, this significant weakness is a cross-cutting significant weakness in that it affects financial sustainability and the 3E section. So the significant weakness is to do with the housing revenue account and the service performance of housing. The housing revenue account, as I'm sure members will be aware, is an account that's kept separate in statute to the general fund. It's self-sufficient, so it's self-serving, and we have concluded there to be a significant weakness in the the financial sustainability of the housing revenue account. This is predominantly characterized, I'll take the report as read, so I won't go into too much detail, but it's predominantly characterized by the operational deficits in the last few years on the housing revenue account and the diminishing reserves balance. We also conclude there to be a significant weakness in service performance of housing, and this is demonstrated in the report to do with the low performance in complaint handling failure determinations and the maladministration findings. So generally low performance in the housing sector, but we know that officers are aware of this and there's an action plan in place, and we've hoped to demonstrate that in the report in our findings as well to show that. So we've raised two key recommendations in that area. I think that covers everything.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexa and Paul. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Councillor Chivot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go over the report as a whole and actually quote some of the things you say, particularly, in the executive summary that talks about strong governance history, strong ability to put in place savings, but there is one recommendation on, if I find it, this is on page 24 of the pack, which is page 9 of the report. There's a comment to your recommendation from management where the council would welcome your observations on the minimum balance, which is 6%, based on your national work, which is, again, you're making a recommendation that we should increase the minimum balance, and senior leadership team at the council have done exactly that. So I was wondering if you had any comments.
No, I think as we sort of tried to say, I think the council's approach to managing what is a very risky situation in local government financially at the moment, I think it's a very robust approach on general fund. I think there's a determination to keep reserves at a strong level, and if ever there was a demonstration of the need to do that, the financial year 23-24 is probably that financial year, because we've seen the problems with inflation, we've seen the problems with the spike in costs in children's services and homelessness is across the sector. So the need to maintain strong reserves, because you can never be 100% sure how a year is going to pan out, is crucial. I think the council have demonstrated there's a robust approach to that. And so we're very sort of pleased about that. And one of the interesting things as we discussed this report with management, and management were very keen to make sure that we, as we have done in the report, sort of separated out the general fund performance from the challenges in the housing revenue account. I would just like to say about the housing revenue account, though, just as a point of comparison, Hammersmith and Fulham is not alone in challenges in the housing revenue account. We see that not just across London, but across the country. And actually, in both financial performance and quality, real challenges, and there's lots of legacy reasons for this about investment and, you know, dealing with the challenges of mold and all those things that have come up in the housing sector, as well as this obviously challenges associated with homelessness and the whole spectrum of, you know, the difficulties in housing. So I think, so we recognise that's a challenge. Management recognise that's a challenge, but in totality, looking at general fund, a strong position compared to many councils that we work with.
Continue.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I wanted to touch on that. So in your report, page 26 till the executive summary, you say that LBHF directing efforts towards improving and ameliorating the service. You talk about appropriate arrangements to facilitate improvement, evidence of improvement, strong performance. You talk about a leadership of compliance, reasonable assurance, extensive discussions. And then you tell us on page 33, which is page 18 of your report, that the council's medium-term forecast is not unlike many of its counterparts in the sector. Could you give us some general trends?
So what we're seeing in the medium-term forecast for most councils, so if most councils will do the 3 to 4 year type forecast, and what we're seeing is at the outer end of those forecasts, the level of savings predicted is quite high. And I think this is just a function of uncertainty in the system. We all know the system works on an annual funding envelope, but you're obviously waiting for December the 19th for Hammersmith, where I think the announcement for 24/5 comes out. But it's very difficult to then predict what that position might be for 26/7 and beyond. And so when you think of the pressures in the sector and, you know, the risks of things like inflation and the risks of increasing demand, we're seeing particular parts of the services you provide and many others provide, such as housing and also homelessness, adults to some degree and children to a greater degree, under severe pressure, and therefore predicting what you might need to do to address those risks in 26/7 and beyond is quite tricky. So you've got some big numbers in your medium-term forecast in terms of what you might need to deliver, but of course the uncertainty is what your income profile will be in those years, what government will do in terms of support, and what other means of raising income you have. So you're, in that sense, you're quite similar to many other medium-term financial plans we look at. The benefit I think you've got is you've actually got a good track record of delivering, and that makes a difference, I think. So we see similar plans elsewhere at authorities who maybe don't have such a good track record, and that's right. That's really important. So yes, it's a challenging plan, but actually you're starting from the right place.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Adrian Pascu Tolborough.
Very much. What assumptions have you made when putting the figures for the next couple of years about potential increases to council tax and also other financial commitments the council may want to make, such as pay awards?
So in terms of our analysis, obviously we've relied on the council's own initial work on that medium-term financial plan, and so the detailed knowledge on what those assumptions are will probably be one to speak to officers about. I think what we've looked at in those plans is that those plans are designed to some degree based on a set of scenarios that are around the do nothing option, because you need to start with a do nothing option or a certain base increase, for example, on council tax or other costs, other income sources, and then work around what savings you might need to develop. So our analysis is more about assessing the council's track record and looking at those demanding positions going forward, rather than doing the analysis ourselves or the assumptions ourselves. So that might be a question for officers to respond on.
Sukhvinder, do you want to come in on that point? Councillor Morton.
Thank you. You speak of a good track record, but then under significant weaknesses on page 25, you quote the housing ombudsman finding severe maladministration. And I'm aware that we do have major problems with damp, mold, windows, and general repairs. The concerning thing to me is that the reserves seem to be dwindling rapidly. We're talking here of a rapid decline since 21, when we had 17.6 million, now down to 6.7. So on a straight line, that would appear that by 2026, 27, they'll have dwindled to nothing. I wonder what predictions you have for that and what steps we've taken to improve the reserves.
So in terms, this is why we distinguish it very clearly between general fund and HRA, because the HRA financial position, as is common with many HRAs in London, has taken a step down, and we've had detailed discussions with officers about their plans to sort of restore the financial health of the HRA, because obviously that has been a quite alarming decline in reserves, and obviously a lot of that is driven by increased expenditure, obviously. And one of the discussion points we've had is about rent levels and making sure the council is very robust in setting the rent levels to the maximum allowable position, because the pressures on HRAs are so extreme. There's not a lot of latitude in terms of that rent position, and I think that's what the council needs to maintain, as well as improve some of the sort of performance side of the HRA, which I think our report documents. So it's quite a contrast. It's why we've tried to, in the report, in the executive summary, really separate out what is a strong performance really overall in terms of general fund, but a much more challenging set of circumstances for the HRA.
Sukhvinder, do you want to come on this point?
I do. Thank you very much, Chair. Quite a few questions asked by members there, so I'd like to perhaps take a few moments to just cover some of those items, please, if I may. I think, first of all, I should like to thank Paul and his team for the work that they've done with the council. I certainly would want to be an auditor and an external auditor in the current environment. Paul has articulated the enormous challenges that have been facing local authorities, the grant settlements, the reduction in resources there, combined with the economic turbulence, the interest rates and the inflation caused huge problems for all councils and for us to manage that. But despite that, what Paul is saying is that the council has got an excellent record. It's managing its general fund resources very well. We always return a balanced budget at the year end. Our capital program is spent. Our reserves position are healthy. We compare well on debt levels overall, and how we manage that overall. I think that is a point of celebration for the residents here of the borough to know that the external auditor is indicating that the finances of the council are in a good place. I want to say something about the HRA. And Paul quite rightly points out to some of the difficulties there. Financially, it's been a very, very difficult position. We've had lots of regulations for us, the building safety regulations, all the other issues that the regulator and the ombudsman has been raising. But despite that, the council has reduced the structural deficit of the HRA from 4.1 million in 22-23 to 1.4 million in 23-24. That's taken a lot of hard work by John and the team to put that in place. And we expect that to be totally eradicated by the time we do the HRA business plan, which will come to Cabinet and to Cabinet in February next year to articulate that. So we're in a good place as far as the structural deficit is concerned. On our balances and our reserves that Councillor Morton and Councillor Tilbury have asked for, our HRA outturn even last year was much better than we'd anticipated. We expected an overspend of 2.3 million and we ended up with about 1.5. So we were almost a third better than we were expecting. And our balances at the year end were 10 million. Paul, I know we've had a discussion about what's the right level. So for me, I think somewhere between 5 and upwards is a good amount. We've had to invest some extra cash in the current year to deal with some of the pressures and some of the issues that we're facing. But I see that as a temporary position that we'll be able to deal with in the medium term overall. But I think 5 million represents about 6 to 7% of the total spend of the HRA. I would be concerned about that unless we had provisions set aside elsewhere. We've had adequate provisions on arrears and other specific issues and liabilities that we know about. So it's well covered, and I'm sure Paul will comment on that in the future. One final comment about the assumptions overall on the MTFS. I'm pleased what Paul has said about the track record on the council in delivering the budget overall. It's obviously too early for me to tell you how well we'll be doing for 24-25. Again, members of the committee will have to wait till the February cabinet and full council in February to get the full position on that. We're still doing the work on that. But I'm confident that the council will come forward with a package of measures that protects the key services that council delivers, the priorities that residents want, and to maintain financial sustainability despite all the immense pressures that we are facing overall for that. It would be inappropriate for me to comment any more detail on that because obviously the work is still in progress for us to come back to February. But Councillor Tilbury, what I would say is that the council makes some very, very prudent assumptions as well about what it expects inflation levels to be, pay and prices. We're expecting 3% odd, 4%, 3 for prices, 4% for general price inflation. But we'll keep that under review. We've not completed all our work. We'll take a view about what the government settlements will be. That won't be announced till very late on in December. So we'll report that in full as we have more information on all those things. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Savinda. And obviously, as I say, you do make a good point. Obviously, that delivering a balanced budget, particularly given the current financial strains that many councils are facing, is a particular point of celebration for residents. As I say, there is quite a number of residences across the country who are unfortunately experiencing the effects of Section 114, and this can be quite impactful on residents' lives in ways that they may not have ever imagined before. So it is to the credit of officers for the diligent management of the council's financial resources. I did have a question just regarding the Savills report in terms of it only goes as far as the 31st of March. Has any updated figures come along since then? Just purely to say, obviously, this is covering the 21 through to 23 period. That's a very small part of that.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, in response to that, no, that's the latest Savills report because of how many local authorities have failed to produce their accounts in time. So that Savills were only comfortable submitting a report up to that date.
And have Savills given any indication of when in the future they may feel that it'd be possible to update their figures, or is this purely, as you say, due to the ongoing issues with local authority audits that it may be quite some time before they're able to respond back to us?
Yeah, I think there was discussions going on about the report being compiled, but it was halted because of the lack of the figures. But we're happy to update officers when we receive a new report, and they can report it into committee for you.
And just as a matter of interest, in terms of like how far back some local authorities are in reporting their accounts, how far back are some local authorities?
I think there is still a 15-16 audit outstanding at one local authority, and there are, as at the end of September, I think the figure in totality was 913. So that they are mainly, of course, 22, 23 and 21, 22 audits. But there's probably a rump of about 20 to 30 that are 19, 20 and earlier.
Thank you. Are there any other Councillor Patel?
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. Firstly, page 54, follow-up of previous recommendations. You state that the council should develop a sustainable strategy for HRA, which we've already discussed. That was raised in September 2022. Addressed? No. Can you please let us know what's happened for a whole year after that was raised? Question number 2, page 23. We understand the council has a 40-year financial business plan for the HRA. Could you please, either the auditors or the officers, let us know what that business plan is and whether that's ever been examined? And finally, at page 47, under governance, it has been suggested that the executive role, the audit committee membership should institute the rule that a period of 2 years should elapse before a councillor who previously held a senior policy role joins the audit committee in line with the guidance of the audit committees. Can you give us some information about that as well? Thank you.
Okay, so any particular preference in who wants to take those questions? Sukhvinder, start with you.
Chair, thank you. I can certainly cover the first two items, and perhaps Paul, you could cover the third one, please. Councillor Patel, yes. So the HRA business plan, the 40-year business plan, was considered by Cabinet in February 22. There was quite a lot of changes happened in the sector with the Social Regulation Act and all the other ombudsman issues. We've not reported that since, but we're planning to do that for February 24. So there'll be a position that sets out the long-term HRA business plan for that position. I myself tend to take a view that sometimes it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen next month, if I'm honest with you. If I go back to September last year, 40 years, well, it's spurious accuracy sometimes, but we will come forward with projections that are meaningful and will allow the council to manage its HRA well. But we'll report that in February 24 overall, and it will explain all the assumptions and the plans and the achievements and the outcomes expected very clearly in that.
In response to the first question about developments of that recommendation regarding the HRA, we tried to document in the report in the section when we discussed the significant weakness on the HRA, the progress that the council's made, which there has been progress, and Sukhvinder's mentioned the progress in terms of addressing the structural deficit. So I would reference those pages in the report, but then to also obviously reiterate that we still have concerns surrounding the overall position of the HRA. In terms of the last question now to do with audit committee arrangements. So this is a bit of guidance from SIPFA, which was produced in 2022 for sort of best practice in terms of audit committee arrangements. It's not a sort of thing where you're in breach of anything if you don't implement this, but it's sort of the gold star standard of what would ensure an independent audit committee.
Councillor Pascoe-Tilbury.
Thank you very much. Pages 25 to I think 26, 27 regarding housing made, I think, for pretty uncomfortable reading. I was struck by the line could indicate systemic failure. I was also struck by the line on page 26 that it might take 2 to 3 years to see tangible changes. So I'd be interested in a few comments on, because there's always a risk with these things that when things are going badly, you put more and more resource into it, but you're dealing with solving issues, and therefore there's almost the risk of the vicious circle. So I'd be interested in your assessment of how things are being put right, and how we can work to make sure that that 2 to 3 years is actually expedited as quickly as possible.
I mean, the issues facing the housing department, contain many national trends, as we've heard from the auditors. There are issues faced by many other local authorities. So there are some deeply sort of intrinsic systemic issues here. Okay. So, to make a fulsome sort of recovery of a service can take quite some time. But, your question is, will we get some hopes and green shoots in the meantime? Yes, absolutely. I think the performance of the repairs service, for instance, especially over the last sort of 5-6 months, is dramatically improved. So to give you a couple of figures on that, we've got 1,353 fewer outstanding repairs jobs than we did in June, which of course is the summer. And now we're in late autumn approaching the winter where the weather's colder and damper. Damper mold cases, the number of outstanding has dropped dramatically over the same time period. The vast majority of those have now cleared out the backlog. We've only got about 50 odd outstanding cases that are not within their target date. So there's been a lot of work there. In terms of complaints, you have a stage 1 complaint and a stage 2 complaint, then it can typically goes to the ombudsman. Residents can actually approach the ombudsman directly. Since September, we've had no overdue stage 1 or stage 2 complaints relating to repairs. So there is a lot of coordinated effort going in, firstly, to work with finance. You know, something and I've set up a budget board we jointly chair to ensure, you know, we're absolutely intertwined in terms of the operational response and the financial response, given the need to achieve both concurrently, but also in improving the service. And we are expecting substantial falls in disrepair cases and voids as our management of housing has improved. And as we've developed a more of a mixed economy of the firms we use, including, you know, directly employed workers and more local firms.
Chair Walsh, if I may, could I just add a couple of things to what John has said? These improvements that John has talked about have come about because we've implemented a number of governance changes in the service. We've set up a housing task force that the chief executive chairs, meets every month to go through all the performance improvement planning. So the things that you've just seen John say there has been a consequence of that rigorous review of those. The budget board John has referred to. There are other transformation and improvement boards that are looking at each aspect of the service. We've strengthened and changed the management. As you already know, we've got a new director of housing that's joined in April, and other changes have been made to strengthen that. We've brought some extra capacity to help us through a very difficult period. We're working very closely with our external regulators and the Ombudsman and others to understand and learn from some of the things that they're telling us so we can implement those changes and make those things happen. I'll be honest, I think overall changes sometimes do take a bit of time. We will expedite those as quickly as we can, but 18 months to 2 years is something that we will take to do that. So we're about halfway through that period now, and we expect things to continually get better over the next 12 months.
Councillor Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. I had one comment and two questions, if I may. The first was around what's on page 23 of the pack, which is page 8 of the report. And that's, I know you're reporting on this from a scientific auditor's point of view, but I did want to make a comment about this. And this is around the idea that somehow we would have lost opportunities to raise income. I understand from an auditor's point of view, and again, this isn't criticism in any way, but something I feel bound to say as councillor, is that when we haven't chosen to go up to 4.1%, which is an increase of rents that was permitted under the government's allowance, if you will, I don't think we've missed an opportunity. I think we've given our residents breathing space. But again, this isn't, please don't take this as criticism, but I do feel it is important to say that this wasn't a choice to miss on revenue. This was a choice, to make sure that people could afford food, heating, and all products of first necessity. So I wanted to put that on record. The first question I had was in relation to page 25, which is page 10 of the report. You talk about the ways that service performance in housing has improved. And I quote, including successfully exiting an underfunded 10-year maintenance contract in 2019. So I was wondering if you could tell us more about this. And my second question was about page 36 of the pack, which is page 21 of the report. You comment there that LBHF's debt is to its lower risk end of the scale as an indicator of financial stress, that our debt position is not considered to be a significant risk at the time of writing. Could you tell us what the national picture is on the matter of debt? Thank you.
I'll answer that last question first, and maybe Sukhvinder would want to come in on the other point. So in terms of the national position, and indeed the London position. So in terms of London position, you're at the lower end of total debts. I mean, part of there's lots of reasons for that, some historic, but you have been both prudent in your approach to things, and you have obviously been successful over a period of time in terms of capital grants to support some of your capital works. So you've had a good track record in that. If I look at the national picture, so you're in the, I think, comfortably in the bottom half in London. In the national position, I don't have the data to hand, but again, pretty strong performance. And the reason we focus on debt a lot at the moment is that debt has been one of the key drivers for those authorities who've got into Section 114 territory and public interest report territory. And I think we just wanted to make a really clear point that this council is nowhere near that and does not have that as a risk. And that's also a function of how you've gone about, for example, investing, you do have some investment properties, but they are proportionate to your size as a council. And this is the challenge we see at some other councils where, hundreds of millions being borrowed by small districts. And that's not in any way sustainable. But your track record is very good.
Chair, I can comment on the contractor one very briefly, but I'm hoping John will help me as well. The strong sort of performance management that we put in place for some of our external contractors that have been providing the repair service have resulted in obviously us making to get improved performance, and where that's not been possible, we've had to terminate some of those contracts and allow others to come forward to provide a much better quality of service. John, I don't know whether you want to add a bit more to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2019, I think, before we both joined the council. But I think that was a long-term contract that was underperforming. There was a move to use other providers. There has since been a change with one of the three repairs contractor providers we brought in to replace that contract. The next thing, so it brought us down to 2. So, the key thing is in this, is having the right contract, and we're working very intently on ensuring that all future major contracts are let in a way that provides sufficient funding and incentive to do the work to a high standard. But also, I think a learning the council's taken over a number of years is not to be overly reliant on a very small number of large firms. It's better for the local economy to have a more diverse model. It's better for our risk. It's better for our responsiveness, and it's often better for management in terms of working with a greater number of firms. So that is the type of model that we're now seeing some really quite positive effects over the last sort of half year, coupled, as Sukwinder said, with this very corporate approach to supporting housing, led in part by the Chief Exec via Task Force.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Patel.
Chair, just a small point already raised by the previous councillor, page 25, refers to pretty alarming stuff. Finding made by the Housing Ombudsman of severe maladministration. I mean, that's quite strong words, I think. Further down on the same page, there's references to the second highest number of maladministration for this borough. And then further up, complaints handling procedure, where apparently the third highest number. I know the work which council has done in these areas, and that's been appreciated. But I mean, those are fairly strong language, and I would like someone to comment on that, please.
Chair, I can certainly make some overview comments, but I'm sure John will want to add some details. There is a report later on your agenda item, I think number 7, which looks specifically at the Housing Ombudsman self-assessment that we've completed. And I'd like to say a few words there in that report about the work that the council has done to improve things overall. I think for me, in all these things, context is important. Yes, even one complaint and maladministration is not satisfactory. We want to have none whatsoever. But the council has been operating in some very, very complex and very difficult national issues related to building safety, lack of funding, that has not allowed us from central government to fund in some of the investment that we need to maintain the homes and comply to the modern standards. But we are addressing those matters. And I think, overall, things will get better, as John has indicated, and already we're seeing the reduction of the complaints at first stage and second stage overall. I think at this stage it would be appropriate for me to say any more. We're awaiting the Ombudsman reports to come out. I think context for me is very important. We've got about 12,000 council tenants, 4,000 leaseholders. For me, I always also look at the ones who feel reasonably pleased that the council is doing a good service. Yes, we've got 89 who've complained about those and the maladministration. We want to put that right and sort that out.
Yeah, I think, as Sukwinder said, context is highly important. The council, as Sukwinder said, difficult national funding settlements, a difficult period with COVID and gaining access to do repairs, some contract management issues with repairs, and also, some issues economically around that time in the labour market, for repairs contractors. What's happened here is there was indisputably, the repairs service where most of these ombudsman complaints emerged from was performing poorly. What one should note is that the ombudsman had a backlog for about 18 months. Okay, so these cases, when someone makes that stage 1 complaint, stage 2 complaint, then going to the ombudsman, then the ombudsman didn't respond for 18 plus months. So these cases often do relate to complaints made actually several years ago, and don't reflect the kind of quality of service now being offered in the second half of this year. So to stem the flow of that, as I said before, having a better repairs service, and we are seeing the emergence of one, you then hopefully drive down complaints. We still have some reasonably high complaint numbers, and I think that's in part because we're clearing the backlog, so people, it's taken a long time to get to them, but that backlog is much reduced. We have far few cases now that are beyond a kind of expected 3 months period. Secondly, better customer service has been introduced. Thirdly, better complaint resolution has been introduced. So when we do get a complaint, we act upon it, and hence those figures of having no overdue stage 1 or 2 complaints for the last couple of months in relation to repairs. That then reduces the flow to the ombudsman. When cases do go to the ombudsman, we are working closely with their kind of codes, their advice, the learning they've given us, from these severe maladministrations in the past, to ensure we rectify that. So all that is the kind of overview, but nonetheless, the council accepts fully that in years gone past there were cases that went to the ombudsman because we failed individual residents in quite terrible ways at times. So the council has apologised to those residents specifically, has compensated those residents, and has done what it can now, to not only improve the service and much less this happens in future, but also to compensate for the past.
Okay, are there any final questions? Okay, in that case, the recommendation is as follows. Do members agree to note the contents of the interim annual auditor's report on Hammersmith and Fulham Council 21 and 22 and 22 and 23 from Grant Thornton LLP, being the council's external auditor? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Moving along to item 5, external auditor progress and sector update. And can I ask Paul Dossett and Andy Conlon from Grant Thornton to introduce the report, please? And also attending on this item is Sukhvinder and James.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll pick up the report. So this is a report which basically talks about the progress of the audits, and there's a sector update attached to that. But in terms of the progress of the audit, as you'll be aware, we have 2 audits to sign off at the moment. We have 21-22 and 22-23. This committee's received the last meeting, the audit findings report on 21-22. There's a few closing pieces to do on 21-22, some final pension work which has just been finalised at the moment, and we have a target date of signing off the 21-22 accounts before Christmas, probably aiming for about the 15th of December is our current target date. On 22-23, because of the various disruptions in the whole audit market, what we've been trying to do is run audits in parallel. So 21-22 was disrupted nationally for both an infrastructure assets issue, which effectively prevented most audits from being signed in 2022, and a triennial pensions update, which stopped audits that hadn't been signed by March 23 related to 21-2 being signed until additional work was done. But nevertheless, we have been running 22-23 in parallel. Our current plan is to bring the audit findings report to the March committee And that will be a final report in the sense that the previous audit findings report for 21-22 you received was where we were at the time. We're very confident that coming back to you in March, it will be merely to get the committee's comments on that report and then to sign off the audit basically straight away after that, because I'm very confident that by that time the work, which is ongoing, and we have a team working on it with the council, that will be completed by that time. So, and the reason March is important is one of the government's plans has been to deal with this backlog of audits by having a statutory cut-off date. Now, there's been nothing official from ministers, but the conversations we've had and the communications we've had have indicated that the initial plan, at least, was for that to be the 31st of March, 24. So all 22-3 audits and earlier have to be completed by the 31st of March. If they're not, and clearly in the case of some of the ones I referenced earlier that are going back to 1920, that's not going to happen, then the government are thinking of introducing this sort of statutory disclaimer, qualified opinion. And the implications for that are that there's additional audit work on opening balances to take place. So it's really, from our point of view as a firm, it's really vital to get as many as we can over the line by the 31st of March to avoid any risk of having to spend unnecessary, it's not unnecessary from a technical point of view, but it's certainly unnecessary time from a wasted everyone's time point of view in terms of the amount of work it would take to focus on opening balances. So for you, we're really absolutely dedicated to hitting these 2 points, 21-2 before Christmas, 22-3 in March, and therefore there will be no impact of any backstop on this particular council. That is our plan. We are not sure whether the government will or will not impose this backstop at the end of March, because there's not been anything official. But regardless of that, we want to finish your audit by March anyway. Even if that backstop changes, we'll still be keen to do that. So that is our plan. As we've covered the value for money work, that's done. So that's done for both years. So obviously the sector update just gives some reports that we and others have done. I'm happy to take any questions from members, Chair.
Are there any questions from members? Councillor Patel.
You've justified the fact that you will not be able to meet the 30th of September deadline on page 72, stating low capacity in council finance teams. And you also you also reminded us of the consequence of unaudited audits. You say at page 75, the PAC and others have been concerned about the implications of audit delays. And Sir Geoffrey Clinton Brown said cases like that of Thurrock Council and Woking Borough Council demonstrate why the issue needs to be addressed. Both councils had years of unaudited accounts when they declared themselves effectively bankrupt due to excessive level of debt. Can you please explain what you mean by low capacity in council finance teams? Thank you.
So in essence, the delay has been caused by three factors, and I'll come back to that factor. So first and foremost, there has been a capacity gap in audit firms. Audit firms have struggled to maintain enough people to do local authority audits, and that's across the piece. Grant Thornton is the biggest audit firm in local authority audits, and we have more capacity than other firms. But for us as well, there has been some challenges in terms of resourcing. The second factor is, and linked to that first factor, is the volume of work we as auditors now do compared to, say, 5 years ago. Due to some of the regulatory failures in the private sector, government, via the vehicle of the Financial Reporting Council, was very keen to challenge the quality of audit more generally. And this has led to increased regulation and increased scrutiny over auditors in public and private sector. And this has led to, essentially, the response of all the firms has been quite similar to this. we've ultimately increased the volume and focus and scope of work that we do. And particularly, I particularly highlight the work we do in local government on asset valuations. The authority has some complicated valuations on housing, other property, investment properties. And because these are estimated numbers, they're not transaction-based numbers, they are an important area of regulatory scrutiny. So we have to get those areas right. And we spend a lot of time on that. I mean, I say we, as in all auditors do that in the local authority sector. So you've got capacity issues in the local audit sector. You've got an increased volume of work. I would estimate in the last 5 years, that volume of work has probably gone up 30 to 40%. And finally, local authority accounts themselves are becoming increasingly complicated. They're based on international financial reporting standards, which are a very demanding set of accounting standards. And what we see at some councils is a lack of capacity in that finance department, in those finance departments, to be able to deliver a compliant set of accounts. And in fact, we've got several councils where the council itself has not been able to produce accounts for several years due to capacity weaknesses in the council. So that's where it's an issue. I mean, fortunately, colleagues here have been able to support the audit process, but it's not universal. And so it's a bigger problem. So when you don't have a universal production of high quality accounts, you don't have the right capacity in the audit market, and you have to do more work, you're going to hit the problems that we've got. I think there's a lot of quite justifiable concern about unaudited accounts because of the very reasons that Sir Geoffrey pointed out, that if you don't know what you don't know, and if accounts audits are not up to date, all sorts of things could be lurking in a set of accounts, which is very problematic. So that's why the government are considering this backstop to try and springboard us forward to focus in as a sector on the 23-24 accounts. But of course, that has its own risk of actually where some authorities should have had a proper audit scrutiny, that might be missed if this backstop comes into play at some places. So that's a concern as well. So it's a very difficult position for both local authorities and auditors, and of course, for audit committees with their responsibilities. And at least I think we feel here that we're relatively, not as up to date as I'd like, but relatively up to date. But some other councils, the committees have very limited assurance on what's in those accounts.
I do have a question then for myself. This is a question more generally to officers regarding the external auditor and your own feelings as towards the timely delivery of updates and the level of interactions that you've had, if you are able to comment on that, and how the two sides have been able to interact.
Councillor Walsh, if I may start, and perhaps other colleagues can comment on that. I think Paul has eloquently explained a very complex mix of factors have led to where we are. But despite that, we're working well with our external auditors. There are teams from their side who meet regularly every week with teams on our side. Action lists produced, things cleared up. Colleagues on the services side are supporting that fully by responding as quickly as they can to the external auditors' queries. Certainly, if I get anything in the mailbox, unless it's from Councillor Reid, the cabinet member, I will get to the auditors as quickly as I can overall. But we're working together, and we'll continue to do that to try to make sure that things work as efficiently as possible. I will make sure in my responsibilities to the council and to the members of the committee that we ensure we've got the right expertise and capacity in the team to make sure that those things get done. We continue to improve the papers that we submit to make things as easy as we can for our external auditors. Councils are becoming very complex with the companies and all the structures and all the regulations and the supporting international reporting standards that we have to comply with. So we'll endeavour to do that. I've always found them very, very supportive and engaged with what we're trying to do and then what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Perfect. Okay. In that case, we shall move to the recommendation. The recommendation is, do members agree to note the external auditor progress report and sector update?
Agreed.
Perfect, thank you. In that case, we move along to item 6, the Treasury Management Strategy Mid-Year Review 23-24. And can I ask Phil Triggs to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the 6 monthly report to the Audit Committee, summarises the position 30th September, reference your Treasury position. It's nicely summarised in Table 3, which looks at the comparison between the end of the previous financial year and then the midpoint 30th September, with the net cash position. Total cash 30th September, 241 million, and borrowing at 267. So we're trying to keep the general level of cash reserves. Currently 250 million is our position. And in terms of how that progresses in future months will depend on your capital program and the resultant cash flow on this particular balance. So this current Treasury position set in the position of quite delicate in terms of the financial markets and where we are currently with inflation and interest rates and interest yields on government gilts and bonds. So most recent bank position in terms of the Bank of England bank rate, 5.25%. That's been at that level for a couple of months and been subject to quite close votes in terms of the Monetary Policy Committee, where I think there was a 5-4 vote and a 6-3 vote most recently to keep that level 5.25, with the dissenters looking to increase by another 0.25%. More recently, we've seen inflation, quite a significant chunk knocked off that in the October inflation position, where the CPI rate has come down to 4.6%. So there's some confidence in the markets that in terms of future bank rate increases, probably not so necessary to increase from the 5.25. But then there's some feeling in the markets that inflation rate, to get any more off that, is going to be quite difficult. And it's twice the level of the government's target of 2%. We've seen commentary from the Bank of England governor today, Andrew Bailey, where his prediction is that we're going to see that 5.25% interest rate level for quite some time to come. But occasionally we do get discrepancies in the viewpoints of the deputy governor will step up occasionally and try and placate markets with views of a decrease in that level, not so far down the line. So there are varying views, and then obviously we get the views from the Chancellor as well, which it does make it quite challenging to interpret for the financial markets. So paragraph 9 on the report looks at the borrowing position. We are under borrowed. So in terms of the council's total requirement to fund capital expenditure, we do use significant. We make significant use of the internal cash reserves in order to fund that capital expenditure instead of going to the markets to borrow. And as the external auditor said, that puts the council in a relatively stronger position in terms of having a debt portfolio that is on the lower side in comparison with other London boroughs. Paragraph 10 looks at the Treasury investments. We have a very high quality lending list in terms of who we lay money off with. There's a mixture of term investments. We make use of money market funds, and we make use of the government's debt management office lending facility. We do lend to other local authorities, but only after the most thorough of due diligence that we carry out. And obviously, if there are gaps in terms of their audited accounts that go back 6 years, they don't get anywhere near the council's lending list. So we do require audited accounts that are signed off and completely up to date. Paragraph 16 looks at the prudential indicators, and all of those indicators are met in the current year. And that, Chair, would summarise where we are currently with Treasury, and I'd be glad to take any questions from members.
Thank you, Phil. Are there any questions from members? Councillor Patel.
At page 85, you refer to cash deposits. I note that the money market funds is 151 million last in March 2023 to 63 million September 2023. Term deposits 118 to 178 as at 30th September 2023. Do you think it may have been a better idea to perhaps put more money to term deposits as opposed to the money market funds?
Yes, so the money market funds, we've made less use of those during the year. So that has obviously gone down in the year to 63 million. They are very secure way of investing with a reasonable rate of return. What we've seen with term deposits, especially if we're investing longer than 6 months, those particular rates are quite lucrative. And given that we're looking to squeeze the best return over the year, we've tended to put more in term deposits over recent months. Not that risk is not any greater risk to the Treasury, because a lot of those term deposits are with the government's own debt management office, which is obviously practically a risk-free rate when you're investing with the UK government. There are 1 or 2 local authorities which we're currently investing with, but we've seen those returns highest this year on term deposits.
Councillor Chabot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. More of a comment than a question, and this is to highlight to members, this is a particular Treasury management report in that it features as an example, as it is said, of responsibilities being well managed, the award of the fund award to our pension fund, which has received a Fund of the Year award. And I think that, should be noted. And this is in part thanks to, the good work that Phil and his team have done, and some of the councillors here who served there as well. I think it's notable enough to be said. Thank you.
I concur on that. Is there any other questions from members? Okay. In that case, the recommendation is, do members agree to note the Treasury Management Strategy mid-year review for 23 and 24?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, thank you. Moving along then to item 7, Housing Ombudsman Complaint Handling Code Self-Assessment. And can I ask Sukhvinder to introduce this item? I should note at this point that Nicola Ellis had intended to join us tonight, but unfortunately she is unwell, and we do send her very, very best.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'll do my very best instead of Nicola. So Councillor Patel earlier talked about the Ombudsman kind of issues. So this report sets out really the self-assessment against the code that the council has completed. We're required to do that. I think section 5 for me summarises some of the key things that the council has done in terms of a very focused and considerable amount of work that we've done on the self-assessment. We've put in place a new complaints policy that we're focusing on, and we've updated the corporate complaints policy, a new resident experience team that's focusing and dealing with all the complaints that they arise, stage 1 and stage 2. That's being rolled out across all the housing service. We've also got the feedback surveys that we're doing, and all that is embedded within the service overall. I'm sure John will want to add to that. I think that provides an indication of the work that the council is doing to implement the whole code overall. The self-assessment itself is attached in Appendix A, and it gives you an indication of all the key themes, and the code specifies it, and the kind of evidence that we provided to comply with those. I won't go through those here, but I'm happy to take any questions, and I'll do my best to answer those. John, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think in line with best practice. The Ombudsman's been advocating themselves. You know, we have this specialist resident experience team and a complaints resolutions team as well as part of our housing hub. So what we've done is integrated a number of different teams who work on complaints and work on kind of the customer focus, working ombudsman cases into a more strategic single function. So repairs complaints have been brought into the hub. And as I said, that's had good results. As a result of that, we've now brought housing management complaints into the hub, and the ones relating to sort of place services will follow. And what that does is bring a kind of expertise in dealing with complaints and the kind of customer service side, working in tandem with officers who are specialists in their own role. So we get the best of both worlds in quite a kind of strategic, coordinated way. Because I think one of the failings in the past, you know, that led to issues around complaints not being handled well and escalating to the Ombudsman was kind of dislocations between different teams, be that within housing or between housing and corporate complaints. So this more strategic focus function is helping. You know, we've invested in additional staff, we've invested in additional training, because it's really, really important. I think we give residents a good customer service concurrently, along with a kind of improvement in the kind of physical interventions in property. So we see this as a kind of holistic resident-centric approach, and you know the signs are it's been working, and that tallies with experience elsewhere in the country.
Thank you, John. So would I be right in saying that that is a case of, by getting ownership of a particular complaint, that it has helped in the delivery of results and the resolving of complaints at earlier stages than, as you say, in previous times where there was a number of teams where complaints may have fell through the cracks between the division of the three teams?
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's absolutely right. And what I'd add to that as well is improving the repairs service, so the repair actually gets done, is really, really important. Otherwise, you're going to get repeated complaints. Repeated complaints put a lot of strain on our customer care systems, notably the contact centre. It takes a lot longer to deal with questions about why a repair has not happened or failing repair than actually to take a new inquiry about the repair that's needed. So this was putting strain throughout the system. So this improvement in complaints handling, combined with kind of improvement in repairs handling and strong working between those teams, is helping. And there's a service improvement board that myself and the Director of Housing chair, that brings together on a weekly basis repairs and complaints information amongst other aspects of housing, to have that constant check that this keeps escalating in the right way, because it is so important to the council.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Councillor Pascal-Torbrou.
Very much. How much of this is new policy? As in, had all of this been in place some years ago, would we have had a better experience with the Ombudsman?
So, I mean, yes. I think that the council has improved its policy alongside its handling, its staffing, its culture, its training. So there's a multifaceted approach. But yeah, I think clearly some years ago, there were elements of policy that needed improving. But not only that, the policy needed sort of better adherence to, you know, and following and people understanding process. And that's why kind of culture and training is so important.
Councillor Short-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about what's mentioned on page 90 of the report, which is that you've launched new feedback survey links to complaint responses, and you're working with the residents' experience team, particularly also in how complaints have come to us. Do you have any indication of trends? I'm particularly interested around the idea that are they coming, you know, digitally? Are they coming more in person, by post? I'm particularly interested in the self-assessment. I think it's quite traditional as we are moving some of our national services online. The word digital appears once, and there's no mention of accessibility around it. So could you also tell us what are we doing as a council to make sure that all of these things, whether it's complaints or the feedback surveys, are accessible to people?
So, I mean, I think there's a number of different ways we garner information. So the feedback to the call centre is currently being reviewed. We want to drive up the proportion of people who get the chance to offer feedback, and that's what some of our customer satisfaction figures are based on. So the bigger sample size, the better in terms of that. But we have strengthened feedback kind of relating to individual jobs and checking not only kind of by surveyors visiting jobs, but also calling residents, you know, that the work has been satisfactory. So I think there's a much stronger sense now of the council knowing when our contractors, the quality of work that contractors done, and how that you know, that make sure that doesn't translate into kind of repeat repairs, or minimize the number that translate into repeat repairs, and also minimize the number that translate into repeat repairs that the council didn't always know about in the past, because there were kind of breakdowns in communication. So there's a number of different ways we're reaching out to residents. Some of them kind of more verbal, some of them you know, in terms of you know, more digital kind of ways, like a text message, and some of those are, you know, more digital, less digital, and also kind of easier to you know, work in second languages or not. So there's a mixture there. I mean, in terms of the kind of feedback, I think satisfaction quality repair has actually gone up significantly in recent months, and I think that's much down to much tighter management of our main contractors by the council, and also of our own direct labour organisation. I think the percentage who were happy with the timeliness of the repair slipped by a percentage point or so recently, and I think that's because we're clearing off that backlog of jobs that the council's had for quite some time. So it's kind of multifaceted approach again, but at the heart of that is actually having people sort of evaluating it and learning from it. And I think, you know, this is in tandem with the Ombudsman's recommendations that the council really needs to learn from the complaints process.
Councillor Patel.
Thank you, Chair. This document refers to a complaints policy at several pages. I haven't seen that, unless I missed it, but I see the complaints policy. Irrespective of that, the essence of the policy seems to be that complaints within stage 1 have to be responded within by 10 working days, stage 2 by 20 working days. But as far as stage 3 is concerned, at page 106, the response is we do not have a third stage to our complaints process. Chair, I think I've said this before, and it's probably recorded at previous meetings of this committee, that I think what, in my view, in my humble view, what's required is an independent investigation of any complaint. And I think I've raised this before, we haven't received any feedback. Is there any reason why the third stage cannot be sending the complaint to an external independent organization, firm of solicitors, firm of auditors, which we have a very good way of actually not escalating the matters any further?
Well, I think in terms of stage 2 complaints, we'd hope to have resolved the issue by the end of that. I mean, the Ombudsman, the Housing Ombudsman, I should note, advises residents if they're not satisfied with the council's complaint process to go to them. So I suppose they do act as a sort of independent third party within this.
I should also probably stress at this point, obviously, as John mentions, that they are the external body, but for the council to commission independent bodies to that extent, I think, as you'd be suggesting, would be quite an expensive exercise. And obviously, we do have resources and structures that we're building inside our own organization to try and respond to complaints and issues ourselves.
Yeah, and you know, we work with corporate complaints. They're in a different department of the council. You know, they scrutinise our work. So when it comes to assurance, senior leadership team. So there are a number of different kind of checks and balances within the council. I mean, in terms of the numbers of complaints, I think the context here is we do about 4,000 repairs a month, okay, plus any other complaints from other aspects of housing. So the through flow of jobs and interactions with our residents, our customers, is of substantial scale every month.
So, any other questions?
If I may, please, can I just make a comment on the last bit of the discussion? So I think that's right, what John has said, that the council has got a substantial number of resources set aside to deal with some of those issues. I think at the last committee meeting in July, we had the annual report for 22-23 of the local government ombudsman service and the social care ombudsman. I think from memory, I'm only going from memory, you'll see from there that a substantial number of the complaints were resolved internally by the council in one way or the other. So I think that shows the effectiveness that we have got an internal mechanism, and the external focus is then, as what John has indicated, obviously the ombudsman's there and the other ombudsmen exist to allow that independent external review to take place.
Thank you. I did have one question I just want to ask to you, John. Obviously, picking up on what Councillor Shivot-Verde had said about the digitization of services, where the situation presents itself of residents that are, for one reason or another, technically limited, let's use that expression, and may only be able to seek services through the phone. Does it remain possible that if a resident is not able to engage with either emails or texts or any other digital forms, that they can still access the full range of council services via calling up the council?
Yes, absolutely. We have a contact centre that can support many of these queries, and then we publish a range of phone numbers on our website for more specialist matters.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, if there's no final questions, I will move to the recommendation. Do members agree to note the Housing Ombudsman's Complaint Handling Code self-assessment as set out in Appendix A?
Agreed.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, moving along to item 8, the risk management update. And can I ask Jules Binney, is it? Binney, sorry, and Maura Mackey to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. To pick up on that, the risk register is built as combined from all the other risk registers across the organisation, and it was compiled on this occasion during October. It was reviewed by the SLT and approved then in the 1st of November. Commenting on it overall, I think there's 21 risks. 2 have been decreased, which is good news. That's 6 and 16. The narrative has been amended on 3, which is 9, 18 and 27. And there are no new risks have been raised, which is also good news. And there's no increases in any risks. There do, however, remain 3 risks which are high, or what you could call high, 3, 18 and 27. And that probably would be a continuing situation, that they will remain in that status. If you want to drill down the detail and ask any questions.
Thank you. Maura, is there anything?
No, I wasn't going to add anything to that other than to say that it's been very stable, and obviously it is scrutinised regularly by the senior leadership team who take this very seriously. There are quite a lot of high risks, but they are being managed as indicated in the register.
Perfect, thank you. Are there any questions by members of the committee? Councillor Moulton.
Thank you. I note that the community schools programme doesn't appear on the register. I wonder why that was. Last year, the Cabinet flagged up a risk of 2.4 million in the event of it being cancelled. And recently, the Cabinet has improved £800,000 for the refurbishment of Munn Street as a decount facility for Avonmore School. At the moment, there is no planning application in, and there is a possibility that the DOE does not agree to the way that the council plans to fund it.
I've made a note of the area that you're talking about here. And obviously the risk register is combined from across the council and the key risks, and we would have to go away and talk to the department about that specifically, and we'll make a point of doing that. And identifying where it sits on their register. It may be that it is captured in their, I'm sure it is captured in their register, but it's not reflected in the corporate register. So I will go away and have a look at that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it was flagged up as a cabinet risk on the risk register, so it should appear.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Pascal Tilbury.
Thank you very much. Just a quick one from me. Item 27. You mentioned that contractual levers are being used to deal with performance issues, which is excellent. Could you let me, or could you let us know a bit more about what those contractual levers are?
John, can you pick that up?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think firstly, there's kind of close daily operational management of contractors, you know, working them out their schedules, you know, capacity, attendance, repairs, weekly performance meetings. I don't think we have elevated the kind of seniority of people in main contractors we're working with in terms of those meetings. So really ensuring responsibility at a very high level in the large contractor firms in terms of taking account for the actions of their staff. That's on a kind of operational way. We do have various sort of commercial discussions with contractors around the finances and performance, risks, incentive, you know, which are, you know, commercially in confidence for obvious reasons. But that type of engagement goes on to ensure we get the best from the contracts financially and operationally.
Thank you. Councillor Patel.
Just as a small point. I note that the council is unable to retain talented people in key posts. I think we had a similar sort of statement at the last report as well. Has things actually improved in any way? This is at page 127 of the appendix.
Yeah. Councillor Patel, Chair, through you, I can make a general comment. Obviously, it's right for the council, as it is for most local authorities, to recognise the turbulence and the changes that can happen as a result of you know, staff turnover or capacity issues. I think we've had Sharon, who's been leading the organisation now for the best part of 2 years or so. That's provided a bit of stability. We've got the senior management team and also the kind of assistant directors and directors in place. We've had some changes in the housing team recently with Richard and other colleagues who've joined, but it's something that we have to keep an eye on overall. At the moment, you know, most of our posts are filled with the people that are needed to deliver the services. We've not got any significant number of vacancies at all, so we'll keep an eye on all those things.
Thank you. Obviously, this is an item that does regularly come to committee and it has been regularly scrutinised. So I remember from, I think it was the last meeting, asking the CEO if this was something that, you know, how the ownership of risks was being managed. So I'm pleased to see obviously that risks have come down, and I say it is obviously notable to observe that 2 risks have come off the risk registers. So I think it does stand as a kind of proof concept that by having this risk register that is being regularly reviewed, that risks that are identified within the council are being addressed and managed appropriately. So I think that's just worth noting. Are there any final, Councillor Morton?
Thank you. The civic campus programme that we note is delayed. There's no mention of the financial impact as to whether this is overrun in terms of costs. It sounds as if from the breakdown here that it probably has. Can we have some information about the likely risk of that running severely over budget? Any update on that?
If I may, Councillor Walsh, it's a complex and complicated project, as members of the committee will know. There are lots of issues that we're assessing at the moment. I think we'll do a comprehensive report as part of the outturn that we'll report to council and to the audit committee in due course.
Yes, I think that is an appropriate place for it. In that case, I'm going to move to the recommendation. Do members note the report?
Noted.
Thank you. And then we shall move along to the, sorry, where are we? Item 9, sorry, yep, thank you. This is why I have a vice chair. Can the internal auditors progress report April to October, and can I ask Maura Mackey to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the progress report which you get at every meeting. It's not got a huge amount in it as completed at the moment, but that's because of the timing. There's a lot of work that you'll see in the appendix 2, which is either at draft report stage or in progress. We don't report until it's finalised because there are often things to be responded to. And I can say that of the draft reports, there's at least one of those is now finalised, I know for sure. And of the in progress reports, they're now coming through into draft. So there's a lot of work going on. Unfortunately, it means probably, I think it's February time, your next meeting. When you get to see our audit plan, you hopefully get a bit more of a flow of the audits from then. But, you know, generally, I would say that the audit outcomes are good. Obviously, the 2 that you've got there were positive assurance. But it's not like we haven't been, doing the work. We've been doing a lot of follow-up work as well, which is mentioned in here. There were 10 pieces of work which were followed up, which totaled 69 recommendations, with the majority of the high and medium implemented, some partly implemented. Obviously, where something's partly implemented or not yet implemented, we will go back and find out what's happening with that. So there's been quite a lot of work to be done there, and with every audit there are recommendations, and unless it's an exceptionally good area, that there will always be work to be done. So that was all I was going to say really, and hopefully the appendix 2 sort of gives you a picture of where we are with things. Things are moving through. Some of the bits of work don't deliver an audit as such, but they could be our involvement with part of the organisation to assist in an area. For example, in adult social care, we've got CQC risk management. That was myself working with the team to talk to them about the importance of managing risk and how it could impact the council financially if it isn't done properly. It's just an important part of the process, the quality process. So some of these, they don't actually come and result in an audit report, but it's us working with the services to actually improve areas of control. That was it. That was all I can say.
Thank you, Maura. Are there any questions? Councillor Patel.
I note that one of the audits which has been completed is a modern slavery strategy. But if I refer to Appendix 1, there have been no recommendations, either high priority, medium priority, or low. Can you please explain what all that means?
So we were actually asked to look at the modern slavery strategy at Kensington and Chelsea. We're a shared service. We work for 3 councils. And the 3 councils do work very closely together in this particular area. So we thought it was beneficial to look at it for all of you rather than just for Kensington. And all 3 councils came out with a substantial assurance because there were no recommendations to be made. It was a very positive piece of work. It had taken into account all the right things, the right sort of consultation had happened, and they were engaging in the right ways. So there were no recommendations to be made for improvement.
Thank you to officers for the report. In that case, I move to the recommendation. Do members agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Okay, moving along to the Item 10, the Corporate Anti-Fraud Service Half-Year Report, April 1 through 30th of September. And can I ask Andy Hyatt to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. The report provides the counter-fraud activities for the first half year of this financial year. If I can draw the members' attention to a few key areas. First and foremost, the report covers an overview of the successes and the actual outcomes that we've achieved during the first half year. And the table at 1.6 gives an overview of the number of cases in specific areas that have been identified. And along with that, we cover the notional value. It has increased based on comparisons for the previous 2 years, but primarily a lot of that has come from some of the data matching exercises that we've been doing with the National Fraud Initiative. And that's generated some really good cases and some really good, as I say, preventative measures, because it's prevented fraud in those areas. I also like to draw your attention to section 2, the whistleblowing. Now, whilst there is no new referrals, we took the opportunity between the 12th and the 18th of November, which was International Fraud Awareness Week. So we took the opportunity to relaunch the fraud awareness policy. We also took an opportunity to relaunch the whistleblowing policy, to remind staff that we have an independent hotline that they can contact, which covers digital and telephone access, and also to make sure that they were aware the impacts of whistleblowing by providing an e-learning course to all staff. So that went out during the fraud awareness weeks. We thought that was a nice way of recognising that week, so that staff understand that if they do have concerns, they can raise the concerns with us. There is a number of sections you may have noticed when we talk about corporate investigations. There's been a number of issues with regards to moonlighting and employee fraud where individuals have 2 jobs. Unfortunately, it is an issue. It's something that has come up. But what I am pleased to say is that the cases we found have come from management controls. It's where managers have alerted us because they have concerns themselves. In some other areas across London, it's been a case that actually it's not been picked up very quickly, and that's because managers haven't been notified, or should I say, seeing the warning signs, members of staff not being available during the working hours, etc. But our managers here have picked up on it. We've tried to disseminate as much as possible to our managers to make them aware that this is a risk, and they are finding those concerns. So we're fortunate to pick these up. We do have a planned data matching exercise later in the year, and we're hoping that that will also bring in the information and data from some of our agencies across London, so that hopefully we can pick up additional cases that may have gone under the radar. Unfortunately, that's the nature of fraud. It's there done to hide, and therefore sometimes trying to identify is extremely hard to do. But happy to take any questions regarding the report.
Thank you, Andy. Are there any questions? Councillor Chivot-Ferdier.
Thank you, Chair. That's probably my favourite report of the night. So I just wanted to, I've got a bunch of notes and questions. Last year, I remember you telling us about getting, actually probably last half year report, getting an extra member of staff. And again, I think we're really seeing the effect of improving in fraud, not just deterrence, but also actively combating it. So continued well done to your team, but also for members, we were looking earlier at providing value for money. I remember that the person that you had hired sort of around what they were costing, if you will, they were getting us back 4 times that. So the ratio just keeps increasing, which is quite impressive. I remember last year that we also had gotten some information about some of people defrauding us through a group of sort of security angels on the internet. I was wondering whether that was people who were operating in a dark web, going about finding data that they were matching with some of our people. I don't know if you remember that. It was called Project something.
It's not one that's come across. It might have been dealt with by our IT people. Perhaps it was part of a cybersecurity and in one of the confidential papers, I believe it was in that.
Right.
It's not something that I've picked up on. That's such a specialist area. And obviously we often get asked about cybercrime, and I do my best to try and answer those questions, but I tend to try and divert individuals to the experts, which is our IT department. I can find out and get an update for you and bring that back outside this meeting.
Yeah, I love that.
No problem.
I wanted to talk to you about, so you talk some of the examples on 145, 146 examples of identity fraud. Identity fraud today is the most common crime in Britain, and in this country, actually, we've got the highest rate of people having been victims of identity fraud in Europe. To give you an idea of numbers, in this very room, 4 people have had their identity stolen on average. I'm very interested in some of the reasons why there is abandonment of council properties. So obviously you give us an example of someone who abandons property but keeps on claiming benefits, but I'm wondering, are some people abandoning properties because they can't pay rent anymore?
We're not seeing that, councillor. I think what we tend to, the reason we refer to these cases as abandonment is often because we can't quite prove that it's been sublet. So what we often find is we have the evidence that the individual, the tenant, is no longer living at that property, and our investigations are realizing that actually someone is in there, but again, they're not answering the door to us, and they're cleverly not leaving a financial footprint at the address. So it's very hard to identify who is actually there from continuous visits to the property where we can almost sense an individual's there, but they're not answering the door. And the fact we have evidence that the tenant is living elsewhere, we know it's a sublet, but we just cannot take it to that next level to prove it. Hence, it falls more into the abandonment because they're no longer resident than actual sublet. And I think that's just the way we've reported it, why there's such a high number. And unfortunately, a lot of the cases where we are finding subtenants in properties, they're complicit. They understand what's going on because they're circumventing our normal processes to get a property in Hammersmith and Fulham. And in sometimes it might be lower than market rents because they're effectively semi in cahoots with the tenant, who will say to them, don't open the door and I'll knock £50 a week off the rent. And unfortunately, that's the real battle that we have. As much as we can try to do data matching exercises, data analytics, sometimes it's boots on the ground and knocking on that door and catching the tenant, or shall I say the subtenant, to really prove some of our cases. And it's really, really frustrating sometimes that we can't quite do that. So it's a case of weight of evidence. So we try to get as much evidence as we can to show the individual is living elsewhere and then move towards possession. Or shall I say repossession?
Thank you. That's very helpful. I had another question around, I remember the past committee and this in that report too, an example of person that was also working for 2 different councils, etc. And I think if I remember, this is not in the cybersecurity report this time, that we had found out through a sort of a London-wide initiative of shared fraud signals network. I was wondering if you could give us an update on that.
We're just trying to get it over the line. I've just completed a data impact assessment. That's been completed. We're about to sign the data sharing agreement with the additional providers. So per temps that provide agencies for us, they're going to put their data in, and there's a number of other London operating MSPs. So for example, Matrix, I believe also Commensa are going to put their data in. That's where the data sharing agreement has now been signed off. Next stage, getting the data out. And I just need to get the payroll data out so that we can put it into the system and start those matches up and running. The idea is it's actually a proof of concept in London, but what we're hoping by working closely with the Cabinet Office that this will actually extend nationwide, because the thing about hybrid working and being able to work remotely, it's not just confined to doing 2 jobs in London. People can be in the home counties, or they can be the other end of the country. So hopefully, if we can get the data in from not just London, but other local authorities and also other employment agencies that provide, councils across the country, then hopefully we can certainly, it's not almost deter, it's almost stamping this out. Because I think if we get enough cases and we really publicise those, it acts as a deterrent. People stop doing it, or maybe worse, we might push them into other sectors. That's the only problem.
Just to say, please, yeah, keep me in the loop in my day job. I'm working on the shared full signals network for finance. We're looking at how actually, because you tell us about how you've contacted banks in France and the UK and how you get that information. So if you're also looking at how to interconnect different industries, I'm particularly interested. So maybe not the other members would bombard them with hundreds of pages, but for me, please do.
Just a side thought, you were talking earlier about data theft and identity theft, sorry. With the National Fraud Initiative, one of the data sets that we can match against is Amber Hill data. So that's data that the police have obviously gathered of all known fake identities. So we do put that in, and we put tenancy data against it, and we put waiting list data against that as well.
Councillor Pascu-Tilborough.
Thank you very much. A quick one from me. I'm fascinated by how you calculate the notional value of this. Is this money that you get back from the investigation, or is it things that maybe you have saved by finding it out in the first place?
It will vary. In some instances, the value, first and foremost, what we try to do is attribute for each fraud type a value. Thereafter, if we're acting and preventing, we can use that value, or if we're detecting, it might be a value we use, unless, of course, there's actual money being taken. Now, an example will be, and I can get you the formula, I haven't got it off the top of my head. The formula we use for tenancy fraud is based on the amount of money that the local authority spends on temporary accommodation down to the number of rooms. So we have 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, studios, 3 bedrooms. So we take the overall expenditure of the council, divide it by the number of rooms that we have for that money, so that we can work out how much an individual room is. And that's the figure then we use to extrapolate when it comes to recovering 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom or 3 bedroom property. Now, we also bear in mind that what we don't do, we only look at the money that's the loss to the council in our notional figures. What we haven't done, and we could do, I suppose, some local authorities do, is the actual loss to public sector. Because again, on top of that, you've also got the welfare benefit losses and additional amounts relating to that.
Councillor Patel.
I was intrigued to read case 1 in your appendix 1, page 151. It tells us the story of a Kosovan national. Apparently, he was granted a tenancy by this council in 2002. 6 years passed, and we find out that he was illegal, so he leaves the country in 2008. 5 years later, 2012, he returns to the country, and it's not known what's happened for the last 10 years. But what we do know from the last paragraph is that apparently his buy to right application was withdrawn and the keys were returned, and no prosecution was, or no criminal charges were made against him on the barrister's advice. I mean, if the idea is that you're going to, we heard earlier about the people circumventing the status quo and how things are happening. If you're going to have a deterrent, then surely this is a case which should have been referred to the police authorities and prosecution court. I mean, this is a man who's effectively defrauded the council of council accommodation for 20 years plus, 2002 to 2023. And yet nothing has been done on a barrister's advice. I would really like to see the barrister's advice to find out why. Thank you.
More than happy to look at that, get the full details of the barrister's advice on that. And perhaps outside of this meeting, I'm happy to share that with you so that you can have a look and see the reasons behind that. Obviously, what we have to be very mindful of is that if we go to court, and in terms of criminal prosecutions, a not guilty plea means that we may be turning towards a lengthy trial, which is extremely expensive in terms of making sure we have barristers to fight the case for us. But often there are technicalities which, unfortunately, as much as we will do our utmost to make sure that cases are of a suitable standard for prosecution, there will be instances we still need to look to the advice and expertise of a barrister. And I think in this instance, we may have been risk averse by following the barrister's advice, but I think at that time it was probably the correct way to go. But I'll happily share with you the reasons behind why we didn't take it. And to be quite honest, I'm not going to give it in open form at this moment in time, but really we would always look towards prosecuting. And in this instance, my recollection is that there was very strong indication as to why it wouldn't have been successful and why we should on this occasion sort of fall on the side of reason and really not pursue it. But I'll happily share that with you outside. You have my assurances that I've been 30 years a fraud practitioner. I certainly understand what you're saying in terms of taking strong action with those individuals who commit fraud, or else we're never ever going to stop it. So I totally agree. But you have my assurance that I wouldn't not want to go down the route if we had a chance of doing it. In this instance, there was clear reasons and clear justification from the barrister not to pursue. But I will share that outside of this in private, if that's okay.
Sorry, just as quick feedback. Of course, if the prosecution is brought, the prosecution will be brought by the Crown Prosecution Service with no cost to this council. So I'm not sure where the barrister's cost would come in.
No, the prosecution, we are a prosecuting authority. So in this instance, we were looking to prosecute ourselves as the organisation. We hadn't passed it on to the police. And unfortunately, one of the problems we struggle with is actually getting the police on board for some of the lower level fraud cases. This probably wouldn't be a case that would meet their threshold to take forward as a fraud prosecution, which is why we as an authority, because we have very high standards in terms of making sure we prevent and deter fraud, we would take the action ourselves. And it was through our own solicitors suggesting that we run it past the barrister, and the barrister's advice not to pursue, which is why we didn't, rather than CPS. You're right. Where we have really big cases, naturally we would try to work with CPS and the police, but in this instance it was one we were trying to pursue.
Councillor Chivot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. I don't disagree with the comments from the previous councillor, but this is to understand. So in some of the cases you've given us, well, in fact, through the work of our teams, people surrender their properties. So in a way, I'm thinking, you know, if people knew, this is a question, not necessarily an opinion, but if people knew that we were going to be suing them anyway, well, they might as well not hand the properties back. In a way, there's now, through those cases, which are in public reports, the idea that, yes, it's not great what you've done, but you can end it there and not face further prosecution by keeping costs and timeliness. And I'm particularly mindful that for every property recovered, that's a family or individuals, but usually families out of temporary accommodation. So we do want that to go as fast as possible.
I mean, that's one of the skills of our officers, is actually how they manage the residents who have committed fraud in terms of explaining to them the consequences. And I think that's really important. And that's where we do get the keys back quite a lot of the time. That saves the money in going to court. It then probably costs John money because there's voids involved, but that's about a unit back for the authority.
Any final questions? Okay, in that case, do members agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Okay, and finally, on to item 11, the audit fees for 23-24. And can I ask Sukhvinder to introduce this item? And also attending on this item is James.
So I'm providing the update on this. So this is quite just a brief update to committee, providing an update on the indicative scale fees for our main external audit from the public sector audit appointments body, who actually does the procurement for us. So for our 23-24 audit, we are seeing an indicative amount of 430,000 for our main audit, and that excludes pension fund audit and also our major grants and housing benefit audits. This is a 151% increase from 22-23, and this point was trailed by Paul Dossett earlier on, which talked about the frailties in the market. And I think in this first year of the next PSAA contract, the sector's been expecting this, and unfortunately, it's going to be more of a hit to us, but obviously it's about putting more capacity into the market, and it's about addressing the frailties of the local government sector audit market. We've also provided our response to the consultation in the as part of that item as well. So you've got that in the report. And really, I think the main quid pro quo that we'd expect for an increase in fees is a return to timeliness. So again, we talked a lot tonight about Section 114s and the fact that there are some local authorities with accounts open going back to 16, 17. And clearly what we need to see as a sector is a return to audits being done in a much more timely fashion. And I think that this increase in fees, which the sector is seeing, it's not just obviously Hammersmith and Fulham, we're seeing this across the piece. I think we'd all want to see an improvement in the ability of the auditors to have the funding and the capacity to actually deliver the audits on time, by which I mean very, sort of like a couple of months after we close our accounts. So that is it in summary. Just wanted to see if there's any further questions at all.
Thank you, James. Are there any questions? Councillor Pascal-Tilbury.
Thank you very much. I think a comment / question. Obviously, this increase is pretty disappointing. I think it's a tricky one when you don't necessarily get 100% brilliant service, and then you say, well, you'll get it better if you pay more. So that's quite a tough one. It does seem to me the case, as you set out in the letter to PSSA, that there is potentially some indication of market failure over there. And as such, I was wondering if you considered further engagement at an ministerial level with DLUC as a sponsoring department. There's going to be lots of local authorities who are going to be struggling with this. And I think there might be a desire generally to, if there is market failure, then get this issue sorted.
I think there's been sizable engagement with through various channels, through DLUC, etc. So Society of London Treasurers is one sort of conduit through which I know a lot of feedback has gone back to, but also we have provided responses to consultation at various points. So I think there has been a lot of consultation and engagement with DLUC on this, but also obviously the move to a new kind of framework as well, which is looking to address the frailties and the weaknesses that we've seen in recent years.
Councillor Patel.
Just a small point. We heard earlier that the external auditors weren't in a position to complete the September audit. I can remember one of the first meetings I attended on this committee where the auditors' fees came up for agreement. And my recollection that at that meeting, we weren't told what the fees were likely to be. It's something which we'll find out in the future. It seems to me that increase of 151% is mind-boggling, and effectively, it's in my view rewarding for failure to meet a agreed deadline.
I think it may be helpful at this stage to obviously outline the PSAA's recruitment process, and also the changes in terms of the obligations of audit that has changed during that time as well.
Councillor Walsh, if I may, I mean, obviously, as the finance officer of the council, I don't want to spend any more money than I need to on these functions. But there's an external procurement process that goes through that, validates all the things. I think there's economies of scale to be achieved from that. If we're all going out separately to bid for those contractors, probably would be paying much more than this. It's only conjecture and hypothesis on my part, but I think that would happen. I think the other thing that we did a bit of research to see what the fees were in 2010, just to give Councillor Patel some reassurance. The cash terms fee in that year were about 410,000, 420,000, that order. So we're only really going back to cash terms in the level there. And if you take into account the real terms position, then probably they need to be about 3 or 4 times that amount when you take that into account. I'm trying to give committee assurance that the sector has rebalanced itself. There were some structural issues in the sector of capacity and so on that Paul's articulated. The whole sector is acquiring the audits in a coherent way to generate economies of scale. We will keep an eye on these, and we will try to make sure, as you've seen from the response, our general view, and we'll see if in future we can try to get those reduced in any way.
Thank you. As mentioned in the letter, for the money that is being spent. And obviously as a council that does have a very strong emphasis on financial efficiency, that we see that being reflected in the quality of service and the timeliness of reports. And that is something that has been repeatedly stated at this committee. So obviously, hopefully this can be noted in terms of those future relationships with the external auditor. If there is no further questions, I'm going to ask, do members agree to note the update of the external auditor fees as set by public sector audit appointment and the council's response to the recent fee consultation in Appendix 1? Okay, and then finally, item 12, the date of the next meeting. Do members note the date of the next meeting, which shall be the 11th of March 24?
Noted.
Fantastic. In that case, I draw tonight's meeting to a close. Thank you to all those who have attended and have a good night.